Hi, I'm Jasmine Gates, and I find it very necessary to highlight the millennial perspective in all that is going on.
It's the Millennial Moment, information to the max. All us, all real, all truth, all facts. It's the Millennial Moment, focus staying on track. Put the word out, the word out. The news got your back.
2020 has been a year, starting with the untimely passing of Kobe and his daughter, Kobe Bryant. Soon after, we were all met with the coronavirus. It literally put the world on hold, causing so many things to shut down, from universities, malls, and even churches, forcing so many of us to homeschool or even navigating working from home. A lot of us thought that would be the blow of the year. May 25th, a video surfaced of a Minneapolis police officer with his knee on a black man, George Floyd's neck, and the world essentially watched him take his life. That shook so many of us to our core. So today, I wanted to bring some of my community colleagues together, Cory Nash, who is a community organizer and also a licensed social worker, and Shainne Winston, who is the founder of New Black Era. We wanted to come together to just talk, highlight the millennial perspective, and get some insight on everything that's going on. So one thing that I feel is important is that we highlight and validate our feelings as people. How has the current climate shaped you and shifted some of the ways that you've been moving?
I think that a level of seriousness has been just forced onto me, and like everything is a lot more time sensitive. Human contact is not the same. Just people's emotions. I'm a very sensitive person when it comes to other people's energy, and I can feel the collective energy has shifted. So me working from home, that's minor compared to when I actually go out and I feel everyone's tension. So the community for sure has become just a lot more serious overall.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Shainne?
First of all, I want to thank you, Jasmine, for having me on the show. I appreciate you using your platform to elevate our voices. Coronavirus changed. It didn't really change anything for me as far as my home and work life, because I was already working from home on days. But I think for me, it was really opposite of everyone else, where I felt like I had been a little bit passive or took a step back politically to finish my master's and to work on other things. I felt like it was a time where I couldn't be silent. Mm-hmm. It was a time where I had to overextend the resources that I was available. Right. It was a time where I had to share the information and get information to communities who are usually looked over. Mm-hmm. And it was a big scrambling to how to get resources to the most marginalized and disenfranchised group of people, which is my community. Right. And so for me, it was all right, Shainne, now more than ever, you have to step up and do what you were prepared to do, which you have been sort of on vacation for a few months. So
I love that. And that brings me to my next question, essentially, is just how have you pushed the needle more? How have you created more of an impact?
I think that similar to what Shainne said, we're just getting back activated with the things that we've already set in motion that maybe we have put down. So for me, I work with Sylvia Nunn Angels in Compton, and they give away food every Saturday. And once Corona hit and we had all this I guess you could say panic buying, and people were, in line at the grocery store for hours, the spillover was that the community center was overwhelmed on Saturdays with so many people coming to get food. And normally, 3-4 people is all it takes to hand out the food to maybe 25 people. But then once Corona hit, it's now we have 125 people and we don't need 3 or 4, we need all hands on deck.
Right, and it's important that we highlight that narrative that you have from your hometown is something that is being experienced all over the country, all over the world. I have friends that I speak to that are from New York. I have friends that I speak to that are in Africa, and they talk about these same disparities that they're facing. So it's important that this conversation is not just existing here. We definitely need to make sure that we're creating a change that is effective all throughout. One thing that I feel like change can come through is legislation and policy. And I know you do work with them, but how do you think we can push the envelope on that?
Man, the biggest way to push the envelope is to build people power. You have to create one-on-one relationships with the people who are experiencing the same thing as you. And if you're not experiencing the same thing as another person, but you have a platform that could push the work or push the policy, then that's how you do it. But one thing I do want to say is, like, in order for us to really push policy within low-income African American, Latino communities, or just communities of color in general, is that we have to remove this sense of judgment and lack of trust we have within each other.
Yeah.
Because one thing that we do, we judge people's stories and we try to find a token story, or we assume that the Black community is monolithic, like there's not communities of Black people versus one just big group of Black people, when we all experience life completely different. Some of us have platforms, but we have to build people power. So it's really about going back to those old school organizing tactics that the Black Panthers use, that SNCC used, that SCLC used, that the Freedom Riders used, was building people power is building one-on-one relationships, creating collective stories and gathering collective stories, amplifying those stories and never letting up. A lot of times we get tired, and then there's a lot of, what I'm liking about right now is that we have people's eyes open who've never been opened, but we can't judge them for entering just now. We have to say, welcome. What do you need? Do you need resources? Do you need education? Some people say, like, I have no idea what's going on, but I have to do something. And that's an opportunity for you to remove judgment and to say, girl, come on in here. What do you like to do? What are you good at? Because everybody has a role when it comes to pushing policy. And then the last thing is to push legislators to vote for you. And if they don't vote for you, vote them out. And you have to remove this idea of respectable politics that says, well, this person is Black, so we can't push them out of office. Or this person passed legislation 2 years ago, so we can't push them out of office. What we have to do is be able to hold people accountable enough, because when they ran on a platform that's on the basis and the foundation of our bodies, Black bodies, then we need to use those bodies to push against them for legislation that is in our framework. And oftentimes we have this expectations of legislators that they're not normal people, but they're normal people. They get paid to do their job, just like HR will call you and tell you you're not doing your job, that you have X amount of complaints. Those same things work, and we can never feel like we have to be poised enough or perfect enough to enter into the policy making space. We have to just build people power and push our collective voices.
I completely agree with that. And that, backtracking to something you said early on in that, brought me to the aspect of, like, the wedge between the community and politics. So why haven't we been able to come together as the community and policymakers?
Lack of communication. A lot of people don't even know where policy gets made, you know? And I would encourage the community to organize ways for us to just take trips to Sacramento to visit these chambers and practice lobbying, and even just educating ourselves on what lobbying is. You don't have to be of a special qualification to go knock on a door and say, hey, I think this is a good idea for you to, let's say, extend foster care from age 18 to 21 because it's not a lot of service. I was a part of that lobbying push to extend foster care through a advocacy organization, California Youth Connection, and all they focus on is shaping policy for foster youth. So Black people need, like, a policy community organization where they go up there and just lobby for Black issues.
One thing I do want to say, though, like, I want to just challenge everyone to rethink community and politics, because politics is really the allocation of resources. So politics is the process of saying who gets what, where, why, and how. So politics happens, but the community creates, like, how we organize and how legislation and policy happens is based on community behavior. And so oftentimes when we expect politicians to vote on behalf of the community, it's because we have a misunderstanding of, like you said, how it gets done, where it gets done, who does it, and thinking that it's always a formal process. Because policies and legislation are two different things. So legislation means, yes, I'm going to Sacramento because for me, for instance, right now, I need ACA 5 to pass, which is a repeal of Proposition 209, which changes affirmative action, right? And I want that passed because it can allocate money directly to students of color, Black students, through the local control funding formula. That's how I see a change in the education system. But that's a legislation. But a policy is something that, an example would be, in LAUSD, we changed black parents changed a policy, created a policy to create a math intervention program for the lowest performing black students in a group of schools in local district South. So that is a policy change. That was a lot of conversations, a lot of meetings, and knowing who made the rules. So that's a rule, but that's not a law. Right. And that doesn't take a full push all the way to Sacramento. So when we understand the value of people power, joining organizations that are already doing what we want to be changed, or creating our own, because it's never too much of us in that space, then we can continue to change policies and affect legislation.
You have given so much information just in that minute of different terms, different actions that we can give, but how can we make that so that it isn't intimidating to the community? How would you say, as a community organizer, that the people that you deal with would be receptive of that information?
Well, one thing I do know is, especially in our communities and in our culture, food brings everybody together. So being able to actually have a meal with a conscious conversation, that's where a lot of our community discussions used to happen, which was at the dinner table. So if we can kind of facilitate a larger dinner table with different priorities, then I think that the conversations such as these right here, this is nothing but just a dinner table conversation. We just need to actually press that issue and create that the same way we can create a party or any other type of event. We throw basketball tournaments and everything else. Like, when you look at the way we organize around our youth sports, I grew up playing basketball, and it would be a Saturday where they would have games from 9 a.m. to about 3, 4 in the afternoon. And that gym is packed, and everybody is peacefully waiting for their kid to play and to support them and contribute and give that energy. If we shift our priorities a little bit, we can take that same approach and sit somewhere all day, have some food, and really get some things done.
And I love that you said that, because I've been using the example of the community does need to step up, and we do need to educate. I feel like the education system doesn't do a great job of letting the kids know about how we can change policy. When we vote, what are we voting for? What can we vote for? Oftentimes people will say, well, it's on the parents. But if you look at the sports model, some parents have never played basketball before. Some players have never played baseball. But there's people in the community that are willing to go and coach those kids that are in the community. If we can get people like yourself or people that you know, and not necessarily putting it on you, but if we can get that same aspect where I have a political coach, and that political coach, that parent has to go and say, I don't know how to do this. The same way I don't know how to go and shoot a layup. I don't know how to hit a baseball. But I do know that there is someone in the community that does. I think we need to be able to provide those resources and let parents know, we can supplement that. Yeah,
I agree. But a few things I do want to say is, one, we can complain all we want. But I think that one of the biggest challenges is the personal step into being involved. Oftentimes people want to complain and expect that the person that they voted for, or that one person, me, you, or yourself, you guys go change this. How many times people came to you for problems like, that's not even in my scope of work, or I don't even know how to do that. So that's the first thing. The first thing is to challenge people to be involved. And be involved with the matter that hits you the most. Some people, if you don't, for instance, there are parents who just can't stand how schools treat, extracurricular activities in school, so they'll join a PTA. You know what I mean? But I give an example of local SEIU 2015. They're a group of normal people on a bus, at the grocery store. They're a group of labor workers and caregivers. And SEIU 2015 has huge people power, getting the minimum wage change under LaFonda Butler, and then now under April Vera. There are people who are who are changing our communities and affecting our everyday lives, and they are regular people. So when we see us that look like us, talk like us, act like us, as average people, changing things, that's what permeates across. So there shouldn't, to me, there shouldn't be an expectation of having one leader or even having one agenda. To me, when say, Shainne, what's the agenda? Liberation. We trying to be free. Equity is cool. Equality is all right, but I want liberation. I want the freedom to choose. And when you ask me, what's my that's the only agenda to me. And when you say who's a leader, we're the leaders. You're the leader. You're the leader. You're the leader. We're all individual leaders because we put this expectation on one Black person to stand up for our community. But as I mentioned earlier, we're not monolithic.
The things that we do well in this generation today, what do you think are some of the things that we're adding like good merit to?
Back to the communication piece. I think that's why this George Floyd thing hit a little harder, because not only was everybody on hold and kind of glued to their phones, but we communicated at an all-time high as far as like how stressful and annoying and how tired we are. You know, you have so many people that, like you said, they were new to it, right? But them expressing what they had to say, that was energy that wasn't there before. And even if they're just talking to the general public, it's still communication. So now that we have these devices that allow us to talk to people in Africa, you know, the time zone really don't matter because they'll get to it when they get to it. Now we are more equipped than ever to actually organize and do something major. Like everybody putting those black boxes up that one day on Instagram, right? Like, those are just minor tweaks on what we can do. And I think that as time progresses and we continue to hold this standard and this level of seriousness, as long as our priorities don't shift, keep this energy for about another year or so, and then we can really see what happens when we continue to show up and continue to be accountable and continue to encourage each other to be leaders. And, you know, that just takes time. It's just like any relationship. You know, you have to actually allow it to develop and flourish before it can bear some fruit, you know? Sometimes the trees will grow and the leaves won't really be what they need to be. And even when the leaves are there, still don't have no fruit. So you just gotta like be patient and continue to nurture ourselves and our communities by doing what we're doing now, coming together and just forcing the connection. That's the thing about COVID. It also forced us to disconnect. So now we have to force ourselves to connect. And, you know, just stuff like this, people that are tuned in, they're now connected.
And you talked about the connection part. So I also want to talk about, because you mentioned offline about the work and the meetings that you've had with Black Panthers or previous Black Panthers. So how has that kind of influenced you and the work that they did? What are some things that you would take?
So really the facilitation of wisdom that they've been able to provide with their examples and then their actual stories and then their openness with any questions that you may have. Like, you'd be surprised how quick and willing older people are to, you know, to just tell you the truth about something that you may not know about. So, you know, to me, it was just a blessing to be able to even witness like living history and then actually get the facts. And I guess that's where true inspiration comes from, because having someone pour into you something that is from their soul, you have no choice but to do with that what you're supposed to do. It's like I'm on track towards, you know, helping people, and I meet the people who are the pioneers of that in our community, or at least like the more recent figureheads that we have when it comes to community organizing and standing up for our rights. And, you know, for them to just, you know, want to adopt a person of color, like a young person, and just mold them, that's like almost automatic. And I don't think it comes with them being a Black Panther. I think it comes with a certain age group of Black people who've seen enough and experienced enough to know, okay, your mind is open and I have to actually guide it the right way. So half the battle is us just actually showing up and being open to the influence.
I believe it is very necessary for us to understand the roles that we play. I believe in the statement that people throw, you know, the older generation is used for their wisdom and we as the younger generation are used for our legs and our strength and the quickness that we have. So we as the younger generation, one, have to make sure that we are willing to learn. We don't know everything. We have to come on to the scene with open eyes, open ears, and be willing to learn. And the older generation, I'm not telling you what to do, but I'm asking that you please trust us. A lot of us are doing some of the work, and a lot of us do appreciate what you have done in history, and we want to know. So please be willing to share that information with us. I think that will create for a good passing of power. And we can definitely move the needle forward and push the envelope with that. I know you probably are working with a lot of people that are older than you, and you're the youngest one in so many rooms. So how has that relationship been with connecting with the older generation?
One thing I would like to call on and ask for the older generation to do is to remove judgment, is to not expect our tactics to be the same. I wrote this like unpublished like expose like a few weeks ago, and part of it is what I wrote was the whole time they thought that we were Twitter fingers, but we were building a base. So what we were doing is like, so that one pivotal moment where such a time as now, we switched the message, but we had the people. We had the people. We digitally organized. So now we need to infuse those tools. And I think one thing generationally that I would ask for is to not judge the younger generation on how we're moving forward, on how those tactics are building. I think that there's a lot of wisdom and innovation that can be connected through generations. Yeah. But I also would say, for instance, for me, I know I don't have all the answers. So I'm putting an older person on the board. Older people have more money than us, just like we don't even have to go. We're not even gonna talk about the economics of the millennial generation. That's not the topic of this conversation. But I think that we need funding. Don't expect us to do all the legwork, all the money you made, building your people power from the 50s all the way into now. Like, you built that people power, you have those institutions. Now you have to grant younger generations the money. You have to give us a pipeline to really building people power and really pushing politics is money. There's just no way that we're gonna push anything. Even when you went to Sacramento, even when you had the commitment cards, like even all of that cost, and that's not being paid for on a millennial dime, because it's not even a dime, it's a nickel right now. And I think that that's important when we talk about generations. We have to still. That same thing of judgment and trust. We have to trust each other that we have the same goals but different tactics, and we have to remove the judgment that you did it wrong to the older generation or you dropped the ball, and then to the younger generation is like, you're not doing it right. And if we don't ever like have a not necessarily a meaningful conversation, but we don't ever challenge those narratives and we don't challenge those sometimes truths, then there's never going to be a real connection. There's going to be pop-up politics, like I need you right now, come join on the board. It's like they don't even want to put us on the board. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it's always about race and gender. But the conversation about diversity and inclusion needs to include age. Because what you have now is you have boards and you have institutions making policies for generations that they're outaged. So now I have to take the brunt, and I have to take the hard part of the legislation or the policies that you made, and you didn't make them for me.
That means so much because we are the younger generation, and I think now we're getting to a point where we can now empower those kids that are coming out of college right now. Absolutely. What has been your experience with that younger generation? Has it been something positive or?
The younger generation keeps me going because I feel like, if I take a step back and they go harder than me, then I'm not doing my job. I'm just a competitive person. So I appreciate the enthusiasm and the energy. And it just seems like because they're just getting into this phase of life where, things matter to them, it's up to me to like continue to reinforce what I think matters so that it trickles down. So I appreciate the younger generation because even when they're, I guess doing things that I wouldn't do or that I don't approve of, I still have to like understand it because they're a part of the community, and I'm a community organizer, so I have to take into account their culture and like what their experiences are so that I can appeal to them.
Right. So let's talk about actionable items. What can we do on the community side, and what can we do in the realm of policy and legislation? Shainne, can you touch on that? Just some actionable items for the community.
Well, the first thing that's the most actionable item is to make sure you're registered to vote. Like, I know that there is a distrust in our community. There's a distrust in elected officials. But the only way we can gain that power back is that we enter into the playing field that actually makes change. You know what I mean? Our voices matter so much. Our words matter so much. But they don't land until there's a policy that supports that. Action items for policy, okay. I know a lot of people, again, don't trust the government, but we want to register for the census because the census allows those legislators who are fighting for us to make sure that they have dollars funded. Because, again, without money, there is literally no way we can push policy because we're not going to be able to afford it. The last thing is stay active and ask questions and challenge the system. Never be quiet, never let up, keep on going. Join organizations that are doing the work or create your own so you can control your own narrative.
Right, yes, those are so many options for us to get involved. Now I want to go to the side of community. What can we do in the community?
The first thing that we can do, and the most important thing we can do, is actually build community. Like, we actually have to work on our relationships, work on our trust, work on our communication, figure out how to work together and build those relationships based on common interests rather than, like, let's say, common attraction.
Absolutely.
Because that's kind of what we've done. We've operated under the pretense of our lower self. I may be talking above people's heads, but like, you have to tap into your higher self and really find a way to connect with someone based on something other than just like your natural inclination to want to connect. Right. So find someone that has a common interest and work on that relationship.
Right. And building the trust within our own communities. I know I was on a call this morning and a friend was telling me about building this era of a Black women's coalition that supports Black women across the country that are trying to get into political spaces, and us going in and basically saying like, well, I'm in California, but we're going to band together. Even though our people can't vote for you in New York or in Atlanta, we're going to come together and make sure that everybody that we know in Atlanta is going to know what your policies are so that they have an opportunity to vote for you. I also want to speak to the aspect of right now, there's a lot of talk around the abolishing of the police, and I don't really want to get into that conversation, or the defunding of the police. And I do want to share a quote that basically says there's no abolition without reimagination. So as we're in these rooms and we're talking about getting rid of things, please understand that we have to be solution oriented and that we have to come up with ways to infiltrate these empty spaces that we are asking to occupy. This has been a very insightful conversation. We've tapped on the millennial perspective on policy and legislation, along with community. So I'm so happy that my colleagues in the community were able to come. Shainne, thank you so much. And Cory, thank you so much. They are all doing great work on their own. So it's important that we show you guys that there's more power in coming together rather than doing stuff separately. Thank you to Real Urban News for allowing us this opportunity. I'm Jasmine Gates, and this is the Millennial Moment.
It's the Millennial Moment, information to the max. All us, all real, all truth, all facts. It's the Millennial Moment, focus staying on track. Put the word out, the word out. Real Urban News got your back. It's the Millennial Moment, information to